Are we live?
It looks like we are live.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the live. It is me, Sander Jennings, here with the
And
wonderful Miss Peppermint.
that's right. I'm Peppermint, and this is Sander.
Yes, and so today we're
Just
going
in
to be
case you were
talking.
confused.
Yes, just in case you're confused. Sander, Peppermint, we've been friends for 5+ years. I've done a lot of advocacy work together, both in different places. Peppermint in New York, me in Florida, but we've been very close friends for a while. And we've been having a lot of different conversations about what's going on in society. I know a lot of people are scared, worried, some even happy. Don't know how you can be happy at this time, but that's the way society is working. And just last week, there was a big executive order signed about trans women in sports. And Peppermint and I have been talking about this topic for years, but specifically been focused on talking about it a little bit more. This executive order that is banning trans women from sports and is called the Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports executive order. So we're here today to talk about that and kind of share some of our thoughts that we've had as a cisgender white man with a younger sister who's trans, who actually was banned from playing sports over 10 years ago, and Miss Peppermint as a beautiful black trans woman who advocates for trans rights all of the time.
Yeah, wait, just you already know what this is. So get ready to hit it. Three, two, one, hit. You know what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay, one, two, three, hit.
Hit.
The YouTube.
Where's the YouTube?
The
Oh, got it.
one,
Three.
two, I'll do it. One and two and three, hit. Great. There we go. Um, when you things you said at the beginning was like, how can people be happy at this point? And like, there are certainly people who are acting and ex, ex, seemingly jubilant and very joyous about like all the uh, discrimination and all the talk that's happening about trans people, because lots of people are talking about us. Obviously, you mentioned Nancy Mace, lots of other politicians and newly elected presidents are talking about us, and it is to hear that it's worrisome, it's troublesome. It does not feel good to hear people talk about, to hear people say the things about me or our community the way that they are. I can't imagine that anyone wants to experience that, like wants to. So like, yes, it doesn't make us happy. And clearly it seems to, I don't know if it really gives them actual satisfaction, but they do seem to be like reveling in the idea of like hurting people. Um, and which is I think is a shame. But the truth is that like we will experience joy, we will laugh, we will be happy. We
Yeah,
will
but I think something that's really what you say right there, like they're hurting people. Well, in this specific executive order and ban, like I said, it's literally called the Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports, and it's actually basically saying that trans women are hurting other women by being a part of sports. So to the people who are creating this, they believe that they are actually protecting people and not hurting people, but from your and you're like they're hurting people by doing this. And I think that's such an interesting part of this conversation because from what I've read, what I've seen, trans women weren't ever hurting other people in sports. And even in watching my sister Jazz growing up, Jazz was the smallest girl on the field when she was banned from playing with the woman. And so there's all this talk, yet there haven't actually been um, instances beyond, any accident that could happen when you're playing any physical sport. As an athlete myself, I've torn my ACL because someone hit me. I didn't point at that person and say that person's 6'6". They shouldn't be allowed to play sports anymore because they're really tall and they're the one who hurt me. And that's not even what's happening. And so I think it's exactly what you said. The only thing it's hurting is trans women, and I think it actually hurts women in general because this is attempt to blame it on trans women when really it's the people in the top. These bills shouldn't even be enacted. What are your thoughts on that?
well, yeah. Going back to what you said about like who's hurting who, I mean, the truth of the matter is like this is no matter what way you cut it. I think everybody. I can't. it's funny. I've heard people acknowledge that the trans community, even the queer community, is a small percentage of the general population. It doesn't mean that we are just a few people that live in one neighborhood, but it means that in every neighborhood, there's a small percentage of us there. That being said, most people don't personally say that they don't personally know, like in a recent Pew poll, most people say that they don't know someone personally who's trans, like someone that they go to school with, someone that is in their family, even though statistically there is probably someone who's at least queer that is in your family, your close circle, whether you know it or not. Like them being out of the closet or not is not, like they could not be out of the closet. And if you just because you don't know about it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And however people talk about queer and trans people when they think they're not around and not listening, that may send a message to a queer or trans person that's in the lives of those people without saying anything. But that being said, of the people who are out and that we know about who are trans, you know, it's like you said, it's such a small percentage of the people that could possibly, even if every trans person who was out and that we knew about uh, decided to enroll in sports in some way, it would still be the smallest. There'd be so many sports teams in this country that would say, yeah, we know all the trans people, man, like all joined a sports team. We aren't any on our team because your likelihood of you having a trans person on your sports team is so low, even if every trans person in America joined a sports team today. That being said, you know, the what they seem to be valuing by saying protect girls and protect women in from quote unquote men in sports is really interesting. Taking that logic, what what is it that they're afraid is going to happen? That's the first thing. Like by having trans women in sports. What is it that they that's the first thing. Is it that they're afraid that these people are going to win for their teams? Or is it I mean, I'm just sort of like,
Well, I think a lot of
rhetorically asking this
people,
question.
yeah, and I think that one of the big misperceptions about trans people in sports is this idea that some man is going to come out as transgender, which, first off, being transgender is not a choice. When you come out is a choice for anyone here listening who believes that you just can choose and decide, oh, I want to be transgender. When that person does come out and feels confident, because hopefully society makes them feel confident, right now that seems to be a worry that trans people are not going to feel confident to come out in society. But anyways, a trans person does come out in society. It's not like the next day now they're just going to play on the opposite gender's sports team. They go through different testosterone, estrogen therapies, and part of that's part of the process before they then, they start their transition before they then go play on the other sports teams. And I think you bring up the numbers aspect, and I think it's important to talk about the numbers because right after this executive order was brought into law, the very next day the NCAA just went boom. Now we can say, oh yeah, trans women cannot play in sports. Nothing about trans men, but trans women can no longer play in sports. And the NCAA quickly hopped on it, followed the executive order, and the craziest part about it, which is the statistic that's going around a lot, is that out of 510,000 NCAA athletes, there were only 10. And I think it goes right to what you were talking about in terms of the numbers and this policy is creating for such a low number of people, which then leads me to ask, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on, like, so if there's no one actually in the NCA, using the NCA as an example, that there's 10 people out of 510,000, so this big executive order is creating so much ruckus and noise and conversation. Why is it actually being created in the first place? Like, at least in your like, what do you think? Why do you think? Because I know I have some thoughts on it, but I'm curious what you think.
I'm less concerned with why is it created because it is created. I'm more concerned with how does it actually impact and how are they going to enforce it and how is it going to impact? Okay, you're saying no trans people. Okay. And immediately that really does make people say about trans people. Like that doesn't feel good. We heard these Republicans and these people passing these laws and saying these terrible slurs on and to hear your government or government elected officials in your government who are supposed to be representing you, representing what's best for you, saying things that are harmful, or feeling as though they're demonizing you, and hearing language that does do those things, is it is troublesome. But all that, like, it doesn't send a message that they are being supportive or anything to the human beings who are identify as trans, who are in this country. And oftentimes the problem with that is that I see a lot of people making videos, and the identity of trans existence seems to be just very isolated and siloed. Like, if I talk about how much I hate trans people, it doesn't harm anybody or hurt anybody, because trans people are just bad and they're not human. And that's that is the one of the hardest parts about this, because you can't make a law that impacts trans people that won't impact other people too. It's just not possible. And all the laws that impact you also impact trans people, like laws that deal with housing. I mean, the four things that are most important to a lot of people, I would imagine, at least what I view as a necessity, and I think a lot of people would agree, is housing, healthcare, food, and job security. Like, those are the and physical safety. Like, that, to me, that's health and healthcare. I don't mean like health insurance. I mean just like being healthy, whether it's the doctors, exercising, being safe and healthy, really, like physically safe, having your body, safe. And so those are the things that matter. Any law that regulates those things impacts trans people too. And sometimes disproportionately. But so really, like, what I'm focused on is, how is this going to impact people? If you have a law that says we can't have any trans people, then I guess the first thing that they would do is, and how they implement it, was just trust and believe that trans people won't will decide to, like, self-regulate and not enter. But if you get a trans person that does, and nobody knows that they're trans, then what do you do then? Does that mean you have to check their genitalia? Do you have to check only who you think is trans's genitalia? Do you check everyone's genitalia at the door so it's fair? Like, how does this implement? How do you enact this and implement it and carry it out? And how do you enforce this?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then
I mean, we look at
what is the impact of that? Those are the two questions that I wish we could talk more about. Not you and me, but just in general. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's extremely important to talk about the enforceability, and also we know that these type of bans have been in place in certain states, and have been, said to be being enforced in certain states, but no one's really talking about what's happening, because no one's really actually, people weren't actually doing anything, or it wasn't being talked about. But I think the enforceability, when you look at the bill that was signed before this even executive order was signed, a big thing that a lot of people were talking about was the fact that it really didn't mention how it would be enforced. And when you kind of mentioned how it being enforced doesn't just affect trans people, this is actually now going to affect a bunch of other people. And I think this then goes into the conversation around Amani Khalif, and kind of the fact that Amani Khalif was an Olympic boxer. And
So wait, no, this isn't just the conversation around Amani Khalif. This section is how transphobia impacts cis women, as all women, including cis women, trans women, especially since the trans people are such a small portion of the population. So these rules that are really strict impact everybody,
like Amani Khalif,
mm-hmm.
like anyone. So, like you said, let's not even go that high of a level of Amani Khalif, but let's talk about a 15-year-old passing trans woman who wants to play on the girls' team, isn't going to be scared and blocked away by these laws. And now someone, let's say they are a trans woman, and someone suspects they're trans, and they're not, out around the community, and people are pointing fingers. Then how do you actually, verify that? Like, in some cases, people change their birth certificates as well, so it says they are a female. Then, like you said, it leads to possible pedophilia. Like, it leads to opportunities for people to actually check the genitalia. Or what if someone is a cis woman who's age 16, but maybe has some? There's people out there that like look more female or male, whether they're cisgender or transgender.
Yeah,
And so
I mean,
then
I
people
think
can,
I don't want to. I would agree with everything you said, except saying look more female or male. I would probably say that they are read as that. People
Yeah,
perceive them as that because of their secondary sex characteristics, how pretty they are. It basically comes to how pretty and passable people think they are, which is so wild to me because that is what people are using to detect whether or not they think someone's trans or not. The tools that you use to decide on how attractive someone is exactly the same tools that you use to decide on whether or not someone's trans or not in general. And the sound of their voice, their height, the shape of their body, how pretty their lashes are. I'm not saying that that is all that's what trans women are. I'm saying those are the tools that people usually use to detect gender, whether they read someone as a woman, whether they think based on what they see is a man. And when you are seeing somebody across the street and you're like, or pointing somebody out that you're trying to get their attention, you automatically assign them, you gift them with, oh, look at that woman across the street. That woman, that lady, she, her. That's what you do. You don't know
yep.
what's in her pants. You don't know whether she's trans or not. She could be. And
But once
it's
you make
the reason
a,
why you don't know whether she's trans or not or whether she's cis or not isn't because you haven't yet looked at her chromosomes. How do you even look at your chromosomes? How does anybody even know? Like, no one is doing that. The only way to check someone's gender is to either believe what they're presenting or what your perception of what they're presenting is, or you open their pants and inspect their genitalia. And that's not even full proof, because if they've had bottom surgery, then what do? Then you will probably need a. I know that there's a lot of people that think, oh, I could tell the difference, but really you probably couldn't, especially the way that medical technology is happening. I know that everybody understands that medical procedures, plastic surgery, medical procedures are better now for the most part than they were. They've advanced more than they did 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. That's with dentistry, that's with plastic surgery, that's with dermatology, that's with even oncology and cancer research, which was just cut. Um, it's with all those things, including gender affirming care, is much more advanced today than it was. Not that it didn't exist, but the procedures for gender affirming care are literally what we're calling gender affirming care is just all the stuff, all the stuff that people already do. But we're going to put it. This is the list of things that you can do. Sometimes in a particular order, sometimes not. These are the things that you don't have to, but can do in order to feel better in your gender, because this is what cis women are doing. If a trans woman wants to feel better with her chest, why don't we do the same surgery on you that we were doing with cis women? Not that I'm going to get into gender affirming care, but my point is that the way the body looks from the outside is how people determine. I mean, you're straight. Don't you acknowledge that somebody's a woman just based on what you see from their outer appearance, even before you meet them?
yeah, 100%. I mean, I try not to like put someone in a box or say what gender you are, but that's something that's kind of been conditioned into society, and right now is being conditioned more than ever that there's now only two genders in society, and it's really trying to be pushed upon people that trans people don't even exist yet. When it's dissatisfactory and creates some carve out, then oh yeah, no, trans people exist, but just so we can exclude you from certain things. It's just so kind of backwards and fucked up. But yeah, well, we're getting some comments in here, but
I'll
I
go to the
think
comments, but why don't you move us to the next section?
yeah. So I think a big part of this argument is on top of what you kind of just shared, what we talked about around like this can create problems for. It's going to it obviously creates a problem for trans women not being able to play the sports. But I'm curious, do we want to talk any more about how it can affect cisgender women? So in talking about how things like this already affect cisgender women. There's a really good example, or not a good example, but in Utah, there was a cisgender woman that was called out by someone who then posted it on social media and was saying that this person is transgender and trying to create problems that just so happened to turn out to be cisgender. And then this person felt unsafe and
Mm-hmm.
in society. And so that's just another example, not even in sports, but just in general, of people trying to point out you are trans even when people are not trans, and how it affects cisgender women on top of trans women. Another kind of topic that I'd love to discuss, Peppermint, is this on this idea of kind of like passing, is how it kind of affects different communities in different ways, like the cross sectionality of it all, and how someone might look at a white woman and they're way more likely to, not face being called trans, or someone with, stronger characteristics like you shared. And that kind of just shows how this executive order, this bill, is not, it's affecting different communities in disproportionate ways and creates more than just problems for the trans community.
Mm-hmm. How so?
So, kind of like how you shared, when people are pointing out a trans woman, in many cases, they're not pointing out, a blonde, blue eyed trans woman. They're pointing at a black trans woman. And
Okay,
this,
yeah, it's
yeah,
you were skirted around the issue when we talk about that. But this kind of builds off, and I'm having trouble like bringing up the chat. Are you able to see it?
yeah, I could see some of the trap.
Um, I think that I'm going to try to put some of them on the screen, but I'm having trouble doing it. But in the meantime, it's when we talk about like who's a woman, who's not, we think of who we compare what we see to what we already know, women that we've already seen. And a lot of times that's who we're attracted to, who we think is a pretty acceptable woman. And you know, if anybody ever saw those there've been several like repeats of um the doll um experiment, famously, the series of experiments um, conducted by psychologist Kenneth Mamie Clark in the 1940s and 50s. So we're talking a long time ago, 75 years ago, that lined up a bunch of dolls, mostly white dolls. Well, lined up a bunch of dolls. There's different experiments, but like a black doll and a white doll, essentially, and asked the young kids that came in, like 5 or 6 years old, something like I'm assuming, who which doll, like characteristics about the doll, which one's nice, which one do you want to play with, which one is sings sings pretty, whatever. But then he started getting into which one's the bad doll, which one's the good doll, which one is the evil doll, which one do you want to be friends with. And all of the kids, whether they were black or white, pointed to the white doll for the good one, the pretty one, the nice one, the one that would never harm, and the black one to the evil one, the mean one, the one that you don't want to be friends with. And it just shows that even at 5 and 6 years old, these kids started to internalize the notion that being black was a negative thing, that it was a harmful thing, that it was a predatory thing. And I can't help but be reminded of that when the fact that somehow people believe that. That's not because it's printed, well, these days it kind of is, but it's not that it's like literally on everyone's t-shirt and all of the textbooks. These are signals that we pick up from society on how they treat other people. The laws that how does society in general treat other people, and how do we see these people being talked to and spoken to when we're out in the world? And trans people are starting to experience that too, and it sends the message that we are not worthy, that we're predators, that we're evil, that we want to hurt people. That's all we want. We don't Not even people, we just like to harm. And that it very much intersects with race, in many situations. But when we're talking about beauty standards and knowing that these little kids could pick up that if there was going to be a doll that was going to be the most beautiful, then it was going to be a white doll, because white women they're perceived to be the most beautiful. Our beauty standards, how thin you should be, how tall you should be, how your voice should sound, what your eye color should be, what your hair should be like, all those beauty standards that are things that mostly things that we can't necessarily change or control. Some of them you can dye your hair, whatever. But most of these things, most of blondes probably do. Um, I have a sneaking suspicion there aren't as many blondes in the world as we think. Um, but that being said, all of these beauty standards are white European beauty standards that are impossible for people of color to achieve. So it is no coincidence that when we're talking about who's a natural woman, who's the most beautiful woman, and who's the most passable and most pure version of a woman, the idea is some white blonde girl. And if it's a black cis woman, regardless of what her features are, then she is never going to be the example of what a natural woman should be. And in fact, a woman who's cisgender, is probably, if she's black, could likely be an example of what it looks like to be a man. Because historically, black people in the United States were legally not even, according to our the original doctrines, not even people. We were only 3/5 of a person. We were not even an actual human being, like legally not a human being. And that was only a couple hundred years ago. You know what I mean? And or as recent as, I should say. And during that time, black women were not viewed as women because they weren't viewed as people. They were viewed as animals. And I feel like we're regressing back to that. Even though we're talking about trans, not all of, but many of the examples, especially the most popular of the examples that we can see when we get to the Olympic level sports competitions, are presumably queer, but I don't really know, women of color. I don't see them attacking, you know, white cisgender women in the same way, with the same level that they are of black cis women. And that's troubling to me. So that's how race plays into this. You know,
Yeah,
what
and
do
I
you
think
think?
another big component about this is this idea that so many people are like, wow, you're really, and then Trump is saying, I'm saving women's sports. And then you look at what's actually happening, and we've talked about this idea that now it's even in chess that trans women cannot participate with women, which goes to really show anyone who's listening to this that this is not an issue of, oh my gosh, trans women are going to hurt other women. This is an issue of just trying to continue to make it, and it's just on the issue, just like there's only two genders. It's really just saying, hey, the government trying to say there really is only two genders. And the chess example is a perfect example because in chess, you're not touching the person across from you. There's no way. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
what type of
it's not about the rule. It's about like, how is that implemented? How's that going to affect? What's the impact? What would happen if a trans woman came in and sat across the table from somebody and moved a piece of plastic on a board? Why is that such a problem? How is she, what is her advantage? That, like and what is it about being trans that makes her a better chess player than any other person? And like, don't they already have co-ed? Like, my question is, even in a co-ed sport situation, which some of them are co-ed, not all, um are trans people barred from that as well?
that's what
How is
happens. That's what seems to happen next. That's what it seems to go, is trying to eradicate and make it so that trans people are erased from society. That trans people aren't actually
that's
real. That's
already
what's being
happening?
said. That's what's happening exactly. And so this is just one example where they create this executive order to just start seeing how people are going to respond. I think you're the one who really shine this light on me. It's like all of these things that are happening are kind of just to test people's appetite to see how people are going to respond. Are people going to fight back, or are people just going to say, no, it's okay? Trans people aren't actually, it's only men and women. And in the case of the chess, you see it right there. It's a trans issue. It's the people wanting to take away rights from trans people and trying to construct gender in a different way than it actually is. Trans people have existed in a long time. And I actually saw something from Elon Musk that was like, oh yeah, trans people really only existed for this 2 year period, but no, we're bringing it back where trans people haven't existed. And it's BS. Trans people have existed over time, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years. Like trans people are here, they're not going anywhere, even if you try to take them out of sports. You know?
Well, trans people, I mean, we have existed since the beginning of time, and if anybody's interested, then they should definitely pull up, sort of a understand and pull up the history of trans people. Let's see what some of the folks in the chat say. No, it's not race. None of you are female. White, black, Asian, Latin.
And that's what people are now.
Well,
That's what people are
I
believing
hold
now.
on,
That's what,
Kelly. I'm not going to address that. What? Because you just changed. You said that I'm not female. That's your opinion. My question is Imani Khalif, who is. You can look up. Why don't you, Kelly, after this, take a moment and look up the trans women who this year. Look up the people who've been talking about trans women in sports, especially at the Olympic level, which is like it's the most popular. It's the one that everyone from around the world is looking at, and see the examples of the people that the how are you finding out about the individual trans people that are entering women's sports? You're probably finding out about that from people like J.K. Rowling. So why don't you go to J.K. Rowling's page, Kelly, and look at J.K. Rowling's tweets and find the people that she's holding up and saying this trans person does not belong in sports, and click on that person's profile. Why don't you just look at that person and find out who they are as if you were going to meet them or hire them, and find out for yourself who they are. If you do that, then you will see that these are cisgender women who are not trans and are, whoop, did I just knock on my thing? And are as much of a woman as you are and will ever be, maybe even more so. And they can get pregnant, they can do all these different things. And you can see how they are being impacted. If you're not able to look on the internet past where we are now, Kelly, then you might know that Nancy Mace, I'm sure you've heard of Nancy Mace. Recently, she and Lauren Boebert, if you don't know who Nancy Mace is, she's the person who was pro-trans last year, but this year, for some reason, she's not. And Lauren Boebert, she famously was giving a blowjob in front of children to her partner at a Broadway performance last year. So those women recently chased someone into the women's room in DC because they were trying to protect women's bathrooms and women's spaces. And you, based on the amount of comprehension, Kelly, that you just had with this conversation that we had so far, probably think that that was a trans person, but it wasn't. And so the question is, how would you feel if Nancy Mace and Lauren Boebert and that author who I will no longer name attacked you and said and told all of their fans to come after you and try to stick the law after you because you didn't belong in the women's room? What would you do? Kelly Frost. Answer, please. Quickly.
I'm very curious what Kelly Frost would do if they share that in. I don't know how you even shared that, but I think that was a very powerful example, and using that kind of wrath from that person to just show that this trans women in sports bills and these trans bathroom bills are not protecting. It's not just an attack against trans women; it's an attack against all women, and it could create problems for any
Right.
woman.
Let's go to the other people. We gave Kelly. Kelly is like bringing up a whole bunch of stuff. It's so interesting, even in these conversations, when someone like gets up to sing, like, I don't know, whatever is the most sacred speech or text that we would all like, agree is, if they like literally said, here's a law that gives everyone free money, and the trans person was saying that, the reply from people like Kelly would be like, oh, I know what's in your legs, or like what's in your panties. Like they're not even acknowledging. It's like, honey, all these folks, all some people want to do is talk about the genitalia of trans people, but without understanding how these laws and policies actually impact people who are not trans. And if you make a sweeping law about something like gender, it will impact more than just trans people. That's the point. Why don't we go from the top and answer some of these questions? Besides the like, what's
I don't
up?
know how to share the questions. How are you doing that?
You can't, but
Someone said something about how it would feel when trans men start using the women's restroom.
yeah, that's a part of it that I
We'll
I have
save it for another
several
day.
friends. Hmm?
Is that a save for another day type question we're talking about?
Um, I'll say this. I was just talking to somebody today who who is a trans man, and he oftentimes has to come out to people because they assume that he's not trans, and they just treat him like any other man because he's got all the things that you would think, when you describe a man from the, outside, if you're looking across the street and you describe him, he has all those same things. He happens to. And he says he has to tell people all the time that he's trans. And a lot of times they don't understand. They're like, "Oh, so when are you changing to a woman?" I think people don't understand that trans people are more than just trans women. I think that they think that the only person who's trans is someone assigned male at birth who transitions to being a woman and looking female and doing all the things that, society has set aside for women.
And why do you think
But
that is?
I think that's because, well, clearly they're I think it's for a lot of different reasons. I think um, it has to do with the fact that we do live in a patriarchy where the focus on how to police, whose bodies to police, who to tell what you can do with your body, is usually about focusing on what women can do, what women and femmes can do. Anyone who's too flamboyant, anyone who's too feminine, anyone who's this or not feminine enough, people need to adjust that, but not really for men. Unless you're a man who's effeminate, then they will police you in that way to be more, quote, butch or masculine. But they, you know,
I
that's,
experience it every day on my social media comments. The moment I promote body positivity or share that I, love my body, if I even if I don't have six pack abs, then the comments go absolutely nuts, saying you're not masculine. This is feminine energy, and that's what these this type of society and toxic masculinity and society and attacks against trans women is all perpetrated from the top. When big people in power are sharing trans women should be in sports, or that you need to be like this to be a man, like Mark Zuckerberg sharing that you need to be like this, we need more masculine culture in it. And we even see with this person who made those terrible comments, Kelly, we see the kind of how when these things are put in place, it creates people believe it. People actually are listening, and now people are actually believing there's only two genders in society, and that you have to be a certain way to be a man and be a certain way to be a woman. And that creates, it's just creating a really terrible society that is where you have to be a certain way, or else you're going to be attacked and you're not going to be accepted and you're not doing the right thing, which is fucked up because we all are humans and we all should have our own autonomy in the choices and things that we want to do in life.
yeah, I think everybody should have equal access to everything, and I'm all for that. I think the conversation about trans feels very short sighted, like it does with quote DEI, which is often by the same people. For instance, we all know that, like, if the government said, if this administration came through and said we are canceling food stamps and government assistance, um, you know, welfare, we're cutting it. Most people would probably think that's only going to affect Black people. But the truth is, most of the people who are on government assistance are white. And a lot of those people who are statistically white, obviously they're usually below a certain income level because it's income assistance. Those people, I think, don't realize that even though they're in favor of canceling welfare and Medicaid because it's going to harm trans people and Black people, and that's what they really want, they don't realize that they're going to lose those who have Medicaid and welfare assistance. They're also going to lose it too. And at the end of the day, whoever says they want to cut a Medicaid or if they wanted to cut welfare, they probably would really want to do it, even though they're saying they're doing it to get the Black folks. They really want to do it so that they can save that money. And I think that's the part that's unfortunate, is that we're spending so much time out here focused on what's in each other's pants and what somebody's chromosomes are. Like, all anybody bringing up chromosomes is an, at best, educated guess, because You don't really know. There are people whose chromosomes, I'm not talking about trans people. I'm talking about there are human beings, cis men, cis women, whose chromosomes are out of whack. That's why we have things like endocrinology and, like there is a world beyond the black and white. Um, but I think, unfortunately, the people who are deeply invested in this don't see that eventually saying no trans women in sports means you're going to have somebody at the door who checks the underwear. And they're eventually going to have to check everyone's underwear. That's it. Look at what Tony says. Can you read? You probably can't read the whole thing.
What about golf? They changed the rules. Only trans people who did not go through puberty can play. I
In
don't know.
tournaments, what do you think? Yeah, that's the rest of it.
I'm confused what the question exactly is. Only trans people who did not go through
What
puberty.
about golf? Golf ass. Hey, my thing is, I'm okay if they get rid of sports everywhere. I hate them, but so don't worry about me. But Tony says, what about golf association? They changed the
I'm
rules.
not too familiar about the changes in rules to the golf association.
Okay, so what they're saying is they're kind of going back to an old school way. Basically, they're saying they're acknowledging that if you went through a puberty, if you were assigned male at birth and went through that puberty, then it would have an impact on your body and your secondary sex characteristics. It's usually at puberty with hormones and things like that when things start to really set in and your body starts to change. That is what puberty is. It becomes more readily available for sexual activity so that you can reproduce or just have sex. And so after you start developing through puberty, then you develop a deeper voice, a higher voice. Your obviously your skin might change a bit. Some people get acne, but besides that, breast tissue grows, your genitalia changes a bit. Things start happening, and when that happens, most of the gender affirming care that adults engage in is trying to reverse that or calm that down so that the impact and the effects of puberty are not as obvious. But there are people who have transitioned earlier in life, like your sister, whose secondary sex characteristics are also read as the gender that they were assigned at birth. If Jazz was not famous and on television, none of the people in this chat would know that she was trans. No one would know.
No one.
And, they just wouldn't. Because she has all of the same attributes that people generally ascribe to being trans. So I think what this person is saying is someone like Jazz, who wasn't famous, is the only type of person that the Golf Association is allowing to play. Those who basically there's no sign that they're transgender because they started their transition and paused their puberty. And then later on, as 16, 17-year-old, 18-year-olds, took hormones and all the different things to begin their medical transition so that they developed just like any other cis woman would, And I think that's what Tony is saying. I think that is I think that's exclusionary. Basically, it says you need to be pretty and you need to be passable in order to play golf.
Yeah, and I
Not
think
pretty, but passable.
it goes back to what you kind of shared before about how it disproportionately affect different communities. But I think this kind of lends itself to kind of like, I think the last discussion we could kind of have here about trans women in sports and these bans. And okay, so like, let's talk about a cis woman or a cis man who is starting to grow to be super tall, right? And have now an advantage over someone who's 5'6", and now they're 6'6". And so let's talk about basketball or something, a sport where now technically they would have a biological advantage. So what are you going to say? Now people should just, have to stop growing at a certain time. And that's why is that argument not being made? But then people are now going on the trans argument and being like, oh my God, like trans women have this major advantage. So the last kind of thing that I think we can talk about here is like, trans women's advantages that people say that trans women have, which actually are not true. There's very limited advantages.
Yeah, I think when people talk about the advantage, look, most of the people who are spending their time flapping their jaws about trans people don't have never met one, don't know one personally, not even one, let alone two. Make it flapping my jaws about somebody from us. I don't know. Make it. I would not feel comfortable. Well, I'm because I'm a scrupulous person. I'm not interested in making. I don't have the opportunity, but I'm not interested in making or influencing the laws of what happens in, I don't know, Cambodia, because I don't live in Cambodia. I'm not Cambodian, and I don't know anyone who's Cambodian that I know of. And so I'm going to leave that up to the Cambodians and the people that make the laws with the Cambodians, just by example. But me saying, "Oh, well, Cambodians, they da, 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 da," or I heard that they did this, that is not enough for me to feel confident making laws or rules that would change people's lives. And so, but that's because I am empathetic. One of the things that's very necessary in order to have follow the current dominant political ideology is to lack empathy, and see an allegiance towards the larger picture, and even at the risk of individuals. But it's not we sacrifice one person for the group. It means all of you as individuals will suffer. So if we have 1 million people in our group, all 1 million of you are going to be poor and suffering, but but you need to praise the group, the country, the party. That is what feels like you need in order to be like Kelly Frost here.
Yeah, well, Kelly Frost in the comments is going off and has been going off for quite a while. A lot more people are open minded, and so many trans men are hiding, so many men are not hiding, but embracing trans women. Burton, I wish that was the case where more men were speaking up and speaking out for trans women, but that's not what
Hmm.
unfortunately is happening. More men need to be speaking out on issues like abortion and in support of trans women because it can't just be women speaking on women's rights. It needs to be men and women coming together to help, the woman that they love in their life, the woman that they care about, their sisters, their girlfriends. Like we all need to be speaking about women's rights in general. Ooh, Peppermint, are you still there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hold up. My dad's calling me. Where did I go somewhere?
No, you're still on, as far as I can see.
Oh, I went to a different screen. Okay, I'm here. Where was I with that? My dad was calling me. I guess
um,
it just took me off the screen. I think I was just talking on this notion that, someone said that men are being open minded and speaking up about this.
hmm
Not in my inner circle, like not with the people that I know. I don't see any men. I have these conversations with men and friends of mine because I'm trying to create these uncomfortable conversations because it's up to more men to be speaking up to support trans women, to support cis women, to support all women. Because I mean, trans women are women, and I think that's what they're trying to say is not true when they create these executive orders attacking trans women in sports. Yeah, these comments just keep coming.
yeah,
See what
but
people.
did not acknowledge a single thing, that we said. And I think that's really, I just think that's interesting. Again, these laws and policies are not laws and policies that only impact one group or another. And I really hope, for the sake of people that are interested in, protecting and improving this not trans, interested in protecting things like women's sports and conditions of things like women, I hope that they can find it in their heart to put this much energy into making sure that women get paid equitably and fairly in sports. But see, generally, the people who are really invested in oppressing trans women and kicking trans women out and calling us all these different things will do that with the guise of saying they're protecting women's sports, but will take zero interest in actually improving the conditions of women's sports. I remember the Olympics 2 or 3 years ago. It was like I think it was the Olympics before this one, I think, where the women's soccer team release picture. I think it was more than one, actually more than one team released pictures and videos of the facilities and the conditions that they had to endure, and that they were doing that because they were, I think, fed up with having always had these types of facilities. And I think that's more than just the Olympics. And I think that, you know, it would be interesting to see if or when ever, probably never, um, those conditions in women's sports become ever a focus, rather
Yeah, when
than
you're
the
yeah.
individual women and players having to constantly try to advocate and try their best to get better conditions and more better equipment or whatever they're trying to get. You know.
Yeah, if these lawmakers and people are really seriously about, helping women and being there for women, then why go attack the 10 NCAA college trans women? Instead, let's go top down and try to create an environment where women playing in the WNBA can make as much as men in the NBA. Let's go create actual,
Yeah.
change that helps to create to get rid of this pay gap for men and women that exists in sports, but exists not only exists in sports, but exists in society. You want to help women? You actually give a shit about women? Let's do something to help women. Let's not attack that very small, disproportionate population of trans women. Peppermint,
You
apparently
know,
our live is
I
frozen, according to Griffin.
that's okay. We're just gonna have to. I mean, we're slightly over time, so we'll end it here. I don't think it's frozen everywhere. I think it's just certain places. Um, that's my that's my thought. I don't really know.
Someone made one comment. I'm going to add in that they're focusing on the wrong 1%. So let's say trans
Yeah,
people makes up 1%. I think it's like 2% is the actual statistic, 1 or 2%. That's the population that the people, the top 1% with all the money in the world and all the power in the world are attacking. They're attacking the people at the bottom. No, let's start pointing up to the top and let's attack those people. Let's make sure those people are not just getting to continue to have all this power, have all this money. And that's what's happening in society. And they just want to point at the bottom because if you're pointing at the bottom, then no one's pointing up to the top.
yeah. You know, I think the this is a really interesting. Ooh, I just lost the chat. This person has a really interesting. Um, I'm trying to find this person's point. Essentially, it's about weight and oh, here it is. Here it is. We can't put the whole thing on there for some reason, but um, you know that they basically saying that hey, love you. I just wanted to say sports that weight those things matter and should always have rules around weight classes. I think what they're saying is that the categories for sports should be more aligned with the class and maybe even the ability of the athlete playing, which I think a lot of them obviously do. Like in boxing, they have like heavyweight. I don't really know, lightweight, something like that, featherweight. I think. Um, but so weight and height and how your shoe size should not be connected to gender necessarily. And I know that most people of a certain gender, like maybe a certain height, but not all. I mean, when because of whatever reason, when I think of a man, I would like to think my future husband that I don't have might be 6 foot something tall, but I know that like all men are like there are men who are not 6 feet tall. So making rules that only um, favor men who are 6 feet tall will, and we say the height regulation for all men is first you have to fit into the 6 foot thing. That will impact everyone, all men, even I think even though there are probably I don't know if the majority of men in our country are 6 feet. I think that they're not. I think it's the average is like 5'9" or something like that. Um, so like 6 foot tall men in our society is rare, more rare, not as common, certainly not the norm. And so making a rule that impacts that group for and have it apply to everyone is it will impact everyone in the group. Same thing.
Yeah, and I think that's how we've summed it
Yeah.
up. Like how this
Anyway,
trans
this
women's
is
sports will affect both cisgender and trans women. And in general, there's simply just an attack against the trans community instead of people wanting to talk about the people at the top who are creating these bills that are actually creating problems in society. And they're just trying to point it at someone else. Trans women are an easy
yeah.
target.
We are an easy mark and an easy target for a lot of people, but the truth of the matter is, regardless of whether we have this conversation or not, it doesn't change the fact that we exist. And trans people, all of the things that a lot of people are saying that they feel like they know about trans people, is just new information for them. But like, trans folks have been in every single historical thing you can think about, like that's affected people on a larger scale. Trans people have been there. Trans people have been throughout history, at all the major political shifts, at all the major, through wars and through different, like trans people. We are just here because you are born into how you are going to be. Whether it's your sexuality or your gender, that's a part of who you are, and it's not it can't be legislated. It can be acknowledged and it can be mistreated, but it can't actually be legislated away. It's just not possible. And so, I know that I'm the same person that I was before I'd ever, like, if this sweater is a part of my transition, you take the sweater from me. Y'all are taking the sweater. Y'all are like ripping up my sweater. It doesn't change me sitting here, and I think that's the bottom line of it. But really, to the cis women who are actually concerned for themselves, just think of how you would feel if you were stopped and said, you can't go in here because you're trans. What would you do? I would love to know what you would do to prove it. I'd like to know that. All right. Y'all, thanks for watching. Y'all follow if you well, don't follow. Just enjoy the live. I'll talk to you later. Sander, you're the best. Why don't
Yes,
you
thank
end?
you all for being here. Today we talked a little bit about the trans sports bans and how it's kind of all connected to affecting more than just trans women and kind of the attacks against trans women. But we see right here the beautiful Miss Peppermint, proud trans woman. She exists. She's loud. She's proud. She's awesome. And so many trans people are awesome. So get to know them and stop, believing all the kind of BS that is made up about women, or trans women, and how terrible they are, because they're awesome and they deserve to have all the same rights as any woman does. So, Peppermint, thanks for chatting, and I'm excited to kind of continue to explore these topics and how so many of these issues are connected and affect more than just trans people, or all any issue in society, and how they kind of connect to affecting a lot of people more than just how it's intended.
Yeah, this is all connected, everybody, and we're going to do another series. And so stay tuned for that. In the meantime, have a wonderful day. Bye,
Bye bye,
Sander.
everyone.